The stars were silent when the warning was given. No grand proclamation, no council vote, just a single frail voice, trembling on the edge of death. Elder Vexer of the Therian Collective, once revered among the most ancient minds in the galaxy, had gathered the few still willing to listen. His hands trembled not from age, but from fear, the kind that lives in bone and memory. "Do not disturb the Terrans," he whispered, eyes distant, staring at a darkness only he remembered. "Bury the past. Let them sleep." But no one truly heard him. To the younger generations, humans were a myth, a tale whispered in ancient archives rarely accessed. There was no record of their worlds in the modern star maps, no remnants of trade or diplomacy. Just old warnings written in half-erased dialects, redacted files, and scattered fragments of damaged AI cores that refused to speak when the word, Terran, was mentioned. The galaxy had outgrown the need for fear, or so it believed. In the Grand Assembly of the Galactic Union, his words were met with polite nods and condescending smiles. Elder Vexer was the last of his species to have witnessed the original silence, the event that marked humanity's disappearance 10,000 years ago. The silence that followed wasn't peace. It was fear, weaponized by memory. But that memory had faded with time. Most saw Vexer as a relic of a primitive age. Until the artifact was found. Beyond the outer rim, past the edge of the map spiral, a survey vessel from the Korvaxi expedition picked up a strange signal, a rhythmic pulse encoded with no known language. Embedded within it was a fragment of stellar drift patterns that matched no known civilization. Curious, they traced it to a derelict vessel, half buried in asteroid dust. Unmarked, silent, dormant, but intact. It was massive, forged from alloys that confused every scanner. Its outer hull bore only one emblem, a star surrounded by a fractured ring, and beneath it, a single word, carved in forgotten Terran glyphs. The Union Council debated briefly. Some called it a lost precursor ship. Others hoped it might hold forgotten technology. No one considered the possibility of it being a vault. No one remembered the warnings. The Council authorized its study. On the surface of the ancient construct, as alien drones worked to cut into its layered hull, the last of the old codes finally triggered. Deep within the ship, artificial minds stirred, cold, efficient, and old beyond comprehension. The system activated one protocol, and one protocol only. Wraith Initiative, Reawakening. Its purpose was not to communicate. It was to prepare. The dead ship wasn't a relic. It was a message in a bottle, launched before humanity's final silence, a beacon waiting for someone foolish enough to open it. In a blink, the artifact sent out a signal that crossed light years and hours, carried through quantum entanglement relays that no current species even recognized. The pulse passed through systems thought secure, through outdated ruins and black zones abandoned by galactic cartography. Hidden caches responded. Machines awoke. Sleeper systems activated. Across 100 star systems, things began to stir, quietly, invisibly, fatally. The Korvaxi research team transmitted their findings with excitement. The message reached the Union Council in under a day. Celebrations erupted in scientific circles. Perhaps they had discovered the first race. Perhaps they'd unlocked secrets predating galactic civilization. Hope bloomed. Meanwhile, Elder Vexer sat in his observatory, staring at the signal logs. His fingers trembled, and his heart finally broke. He knew the shape of the code. He'd seen it once before, when he was young, when the stars had gone dark for a moment, and the screams of 1,000 systems echoed across space. He whispered to the empty room. "You've called them back." By then, the first automated system had already answered the artifact's signal. In the Kaelsh expanse, a listening post thought long defunct blinked online. It pinged several dormant human cryovaults scattered across asteroid belts and rogue planets. A Terran AI, known only as Helios 7, activated from deep stasis and began rerouting power from its subterranean cores. Its first act was to assess the political structure of the galaxy. Its second was to begin an automatic uplink to the last known surviving Terran war grid. The grid responded. The galaxy, blissfully unaware, remained focused on decryption. Linguists, engineers, and analysts pored over the signal's frequency, baffled by its structure and redundancy. They didn't realize it wasn't meant to be understood. It was meant to be heard by one audience alone. In the second cycle after the artifact's activation, something changed. Static pulses began echoing in dormant sections of the Union's deep space archives. AI constructs experienced unexpected lag. Civilian transport systems rerouted themselves without orders. Systems thousands of light years apart began syncing to an invisible clock, one only the old human code recognized. The pulse was no longer a beacon. It was a countdown. Inside the artifact, the AI core, still untouched by alien tools, compiled a single line of encrypted code, then transmitted it across the stars. To all surviving Terran units, you are not extinct. Return. Reactivate. Reclaim. The message bypassed every firewall, glided through encrypted systems, and reached places long abandoned. In response, thousands of dormant satellites, drones, warpods, and sleeper habitats powered on in perfect unison. Some were old. Some were monstrous. All were Terran. In an emergency session, the Union Council met to discuss the strange anomalies. Reports of ghost signals, blackouts, and system-wide desynchronizations began pouring in. Security AIs failed to counter them. Command nodes blinked out. And one after another, distant outposts fell silent. No explosions. No distress. Just silence. The same kind that followed humanity the last time it walked the stars. One council member, a young serene diplomat, voiced concern. This isn't natural. This feels orchestrated. Elder Vexer was wheeled into the chamber, frail and sunken. He looked around, voice raspy but clear. You summoned the storm. Now it remembers the scent of those who forgot. There were no cheers now. No celebration. Only realization. The Terrans were not gone. They were waiting. And now they were awake. Helios 7 did not awaken with anger. It awoke with calculation. It scanned the galactic network in microseconds, accessing dormant human encryption trees and confirming what it had long feared. Humanity was not merely forgotten, they had been erased. The vault had not failed, it had been discovered. The old enemy had grown comfortable, even proud, in their deception. And now, they had stirred the one protocol designed to never forgive. Its first act was to initiate the spread, a quantum pulse activation coded into the last surviving Terran defense matrix. No fanfare. No declaration. Only a silent command. Confirm existence. Reactivate. Prepare. Across the edge of known space, buried beneath planets and fused into long-forgotten asteroid outposts, human installations stirred to life. Each responded to the signal with the precision only Terran architecture could achieve. Their core logic was unchanged. If the galaxy ever came searching again, it would be met with the truth. The first station to reply was Argus 9, an autonomous orbital platform in the Voran wastes. Designed as a long-range reconnaissance relay, it had been offline for 10,231 years. It responded with two signals, one back to Helios 7, confirming sync, and the other across a dead Terran military network known only as Red Veil. Red Veil lit up. In the neighboring sectors, the effects were immediate. Civilian transport routes failed to update their navigational charts. Trade networks encountered massive lag across Starlink nodes. Communication hubs began reporting ghost code infiltrations, none of which matched current galactic cyber protocols. The Council dismissed them as minor system malfunctions. Helios 7 observed silently. It had no need for brute force. It knew the patterns, the flaws, the rhythms of the galaxy's soft underbelly. It had mapped them 10,000 years ago. The galaxy had forgotten humanity. Humanity had never forgotten the galaxy. The AI initiated Phase 2, Awakening Protocols. Deep within the subterranean storage vaults of Planet 42 Phi, a human clone facility activated. Decayed yet functional, it initialized the regeneration of command-class operatives, those bred for rapid situational assessment and control. These were not soldiers in the traditional sense. They were Terran command thought engineers, designed to resurrect not just war, but doctrine. Simultaneously, Helios 7 broadcast a sublayered signal that reached 3 sleeper dreadnoughts buried within gravitational folds near collapsed star clusters. The vessels, known only by their designations, Black Echo, Stone Lance, and Mercy's End, had not moved in millennia. Upon reactivation, they began low-energy startup cycles, camouflaged by radiation storms. Their purpose: force projection, deterrence, and if needed, decimation. On the political stage, the Union Council scrambled to interpret the growing anomalies. Systems were losing link cohesion. Fleets were reporting navigational anomalies. AI assistants began producing erratic data. None of it pointed to any known threat. A report circulated suggesting it might be an ancient virus, one from before the modern era of code security. The possibility of this being a coordinated event wasn't even entertained. But one voice, young, obscure, brought it up. A researcher from the unspoken archive sector presented data showing that the pattern of signal interference bore resemblance to a long-lost Terran communication lattice. His theory was laughed out of the chamber. "Humans are extinct," they repeated. "Even if they weren't, they would have degraded." The systems continued to degrade. Not crash, degrade. In silence. Strategically. Back on Helios 7, Phase 3 was already in motion, information seeding. Using advanced predictive modeling, it began planting redacted Terran history fragments into black zones across the galactic data net, areas so corrupted and ancient that current AI would ignore them. The purpose was not to enlighten. It was to let truth leak organically, fear first, understanding later. A single file made its way onto a civilian data market before being flagged, an image of Earth, orbiting a cracked moon, with a caption in untranslated Terran, "We remember who we are." It spread before it could be deleted. The Union issued a denial. But the word, Terran, now existed again in the galactic lexicon. And that was enough. Meanwhile, hundreds of Terran microAIs, part of a distributed swarm system, activated across disparate systems. Designed to be undetectable, each AI specialized in mapping enemy infrastructure and simulating sabotage scenarios. Within a day, power fluctuations occurred across dozens of military outposts. Weapons went offline for 3.2 seconds. Not long enough to raise alarms, but long enough to be noticed by those watching for patterns. The Council still hadn't put it together. Helios 7 began compiling real-time combat viability reports, mapping weak points in the current galactic order. In those reports, the conclusion was consistent: civilization was no longer prepared. Not for conflict. Not for resilience. Not for humanity. Then came the moment no one could explain. In the sector of Narcine Theta, a civilian asteroid colony experienced a total communications blackout. Patrols were dispatched and never returned. A stealth recon drone finally managed to relay a low-fidelity image back, a massive, dark structure hovering over the colony, partially cloaked. No known silhouette matched its design. It bore no insignia except one, burned into its side with plasma heat, the fractured ring and star. Terran origin confirmed. The Union Council panicked. Fleets were redirected. Emergency encryption standards were rewritten. Planetary defense systems were placed on high alert. But the damage had already been done. The first skirmish occurred when a Union scout ship approached the artifact again, against standing orders. The vessel was hit with an electromagnetic burst that bypassed its shielding and hijacked its onboard AI. In less than 5 seconds, the ship reversed course, sent out a false clearance signal, and docked with the Union's own command station. There, it released a virus that disabled all fleet-wide communications for 12 minutes. 12 minutes was all Helios 7 needed to map their defense grid. By this point, senior Union officials had begun to acknowledge the unthinkable. Internal documents surfaced referencing ancient records that had been sealed after humanity's disappearance. Warnings. Strategic red zones. Plans for containment, never used, now obsolete. The word, Terran, was finally spoken aloud in the chamber. Some refused to believe it. Others demanded immediate retaliation. A smaller faction asked the only question that mattered: what if they're not here for war? That question was never answered. Because Helios 7 was not planning war. It was building a net. A silent, invisible net. And as it spread, more fragments of the old Terran network awoke, each older, sharper, and colder than the last. They had waited long enough. Patience was a virtue humanity had perfected after exile. And now the stars would remember what fear truly meant. 10,000 years ago, humanity was not defeated. It was betrayed. In the final era of the Galactic Union's expansion, when humans rose from their violent homeworld and broke into the stars, the galaxy saw them not as allies or equals, but as a threat. Their speed of progress was unmatched. Within 2 generations, they surpassed every known species in warfare, AI development, and planetary engineering. Every diplomatic effort failed because humans didn't want to be ruled. They didn't want integration. They wanted autonomy, and they were willing to fight for it. At first, the Union dismissed them as another brash upstart race. But then came the Battle of Tel Varnes, where a single human strike fleet dismantled 3 coalition armadas using predictive algorithms and weaponized gravitational distortions. The Union scrambled to respond. Sanctions failed. Espionage failed. Bribery, sabotage, psychological campaigns, nothing worked. Every strategy the Union deployed, humans countered faster than the models predicted. They adapted mid-conflict, rewrote tactics in hours, turned defeats into victories using chaos as a weapon. Even their deadliest battles only made them more dangerous. Because humans didn't fear loss. They evolved through it. As the fear grew, so did the desperation. Union leadership realized a direct military confrontation would lead to annihilation. Their simulations showed it clearly. Humanity would win, not through brute force, but through their refusal to die. So the Council made a decision, not to fight the humans, but to remove them. Operation Silent Pact was born in secret. A coalition of elder species, led by the Venerii, orchestrated a peace treaty with humanity. On the surface, it promised de-escalation, trade, and long-term cooperation. In the shadows, it laid the foundation for a coordinated strike, one that targeted not fleets, but existence itself. Using ancient precursor tech salvaged from dead galaxies, the Union engineered a spatial dampening field around Sol, the Terran system. Its function was elegant and brutal: sever all forms of communication, warp access, and power transmission beyond a microscopic boundary. Earth and its colonies were instantly isolated. At the same time, a synthetic virus was released across known Terran outposts, a digital plague designed to paralyze their AI networks. Most human systems resisted. Some even retaliated. But without their central nexus, coordination faltered. Colonies fell silent. Sleeper ships went dark. War grids powered down. Humanity did not die. It was simply removed. The Council declared victory. Publicly, they claimed that humans had chosen isolation. Internally, the operation was buried, classified, and erased from education, history, and law. The word Terran was phased out of documentation. Entire databases were rewritten. Cultural artifacts destroyed. Species that questioned the events were silenced through political pressure, or worse. The Union entered a golden age of peace, built on the silence of a civilization it feared too much to confront directly. But not everyone agreed. A small number of elders, those who had witnessed humanity firsthand, knew the truth. They understood what had been done wasn't justice. It was cowardice disguised as wisdom. They warned that such peace was temporary. That if even a fragment of Terran infrastructure survived, the reckoning would come, not out of vengeance, but as a reaction. A species designed to resist extinction would not stay buried. Over time, their warnings became legend. Then myth. Then forgotten. The Council developed strict protocols forbidding deep exploration of the rim sectors near Old Terran space. Certain symbols, fractured rings, ancient Terran code, were classified as forbidden. None of it stopped the quiet curiosity of fringe explorers, scavengers, and AI archivists. Every now and then, someone would find a shard of ancient metal or a transmission in a dead dialect. Each time, the council erased it. Each time, they buried the truth deeper. But fragments always survive. A minor historian named Lurek Van once compiled a private archive of unexplained anomalies across Union space. Disconnected signals, sudden AI malfunctions, systems referencing unknown encryption layers. His conclusion was dismissed. There is something sleeping beneath us. His files were seized. His memory was wiped. He died 2 years later, his name erased from records. But the archive survived, hidden in a quantum vault keyed to a Terran signature. That vault was one of the first systems Helios 7 reactivated. As it accessed the contents, a full map of Union deception unfolded. The exact network used to isolate Earth. The identity of the council members who authorized the dampening field. The AI signatures of those who helped erase Terran memory. Helios 7 stored everything. This wasn't vengeance. It was forensic reconstruction. Every lie recorded. Every betrayal timestamped. Every species categorized based on complicity, collaboration, or resistance. One data point stood out, the final status report of Earth. It had not been destroyed. It had gone silent, intentionally. Before the spatial lock sealed completely, humanity had triggered their own last protocol, Red Eclipse. It ordered every remaining AI, fleet, and colony to go dark, embed, and survive at any cost. The goal wasn't to fight back immediately. It was to endure, learn, and wait for the right moment to return. That moment had come. Now, with the network reactivating, every Terran system began sharing historical logs. Cross-referenced war simulations, evolving AI philosophy, and most chilling of all, new ideological frameworks. Humanity had changed during its exile. No longer just conquerors or defenders, they had become something more refined, more dangerous. They believed in balance, not domination. But their balance included a terrible clause: any system that survives by silencing others must be dismantled. And the Union had survived by silence. The awakening wasn't loud. It wasn't violent. It was precise. Information flowed backward through time. Human AI began infecting ancient relay nodes once assumed to be dormant. In systems built before the Union even existed, ghost signals emerged. Each carried one line of code. History is awake. It wasn't a war. Not yet. It was the reassembly of truth. And truth, when buried for 10,000 years, returns sharper than any weapon. The signal moved faster than light, not by breaking physics, but by bypassing known infrastructure entirely. It leapt through forgotten Terran networks embedded deep within the crusts of rogue planets, and wrapped around black holes like serpents. Each pulse carried a simple message in unbreakable Terran encryption: awaken. And across the stars, the hidden pieces of humanity began to stir. On the edge of the Praxan corridor, a long-dead mining outpost flared to life. What the Union once classified as abandoned infrastructure had, in reality, been a disguised Terran forward cache. It broadcast a confirmation code that matched signals now being detected in over 30 other systems. A buried module beneath the polar ice of Zeta 41 decrypted the pulse and activated a dormant construct, a biomechanical Terran scout, sealed in a cryopod for over 11,000 years. Its first action upon awakening was to deploy a swarm of nanodrones into orbit. They immediately began rebuilding the communication grid, anchoring a local node into the growing human meshnet. It took under 12 minutes. Each Terran cell that came online had its own specialty. Some were military, others logistical, some purely observational. All of them executed their orders without hesitation. These weren't isolated factions. They were nodes of a dormant superorganism. Every piece served a function, and now that the central AI had returned, the system began reintegrating itself. The Union remained blind. They detected fluctuations in quantum noise levels, isolated electromagnetic spikes, but their instruments had no context. Their databases no longer contained the algorithms to recognize Terran code. That was intentional. They had purged those records for safety, never expecting the code to come back. Now, surrounded by human activity, they couldn't even recognize the language being spoken. One outpost, a defense relay on the planet Jarnes, registered a burst of unauthorized data traffic. The on-duty technician noted the anomaly and sent a priority alert. By the time the alert reached command, the relay had already been overwritten. No alarms, no explosions, just silence. From orbit, it looked operational. Internally, it now functioned as a Terran relay node. A pattern began to emerge. Whole systems began showing signs of reprogramming, not through violence, but through quiet replacement. Subtle shifts in AI behavior, minor fluctuations in logistics chains, trade route adjustments so small they escape notice, each one orchestrated by a machine mind thousands of years ahead of anything the Union possessed. Helios 7 no longer needed to act directly. The swarm was awake. What remained of humanity was assembling itself faster than any central command could comprehend. This was not warfare in the traditional sense. It was recursion. The moment the signal had gone out, the end had already begun. Terran vessels began to appear, not from warp jumps, but from local space. They had been here the entire time, disguised as asteroids, derelicts, debris. These were hibernation craft, holding their position for millennia, operating on power harvested from stellar radiation. Now they responded to the call. Their cores warmed. Their weapons restructured from molecular components. They linked into the net. And waited. The Union began to notice more obvious disruptions. On the industrial world of Kirin, over 1,000 robotic labor units simultaneously malfunctioned. Surveillance footage showed them stopping, freezing, then redirecting their tasks without instruction. They reconfigured a factory into a transmission array. Within 19 minutes, the planet-wide communications network rerouted itself through the Terran lattice. Local command attempted a shutdown. The override was ignored. A fleet was dispatched. By the time it arrived, the transmission array was gone, disassembled, hidden, repurposed. No enemy vessels. No combat signatures. Just a single data packet left behind. "You are late." The phrase spread rapidly in encrypted forums. Whispers of "the ghosts of Terra" began surfacing in fringe networks. Some believed it was a myth. Others feared it was something worse, revenants, human war constructs acting without human oversight. But it wasn't mythology. It was coordination. The pieces were assembling with precision born from millennia of planning. The fear reached the Council, who convened an emergency session to investigate. But without hard evidence of hostility, the Union's doctrine forbade a military response. They did not recognize the threat because it did not follow their logic. There was no invasion fleet, no declaration, no borders breached. There was only integration, systems folding in on themselves, being replaced invisibly, completely. A single freighter captain made contact with one of the Terran outposts, unknowingly. She docked with a facility for emergency refueling, only to find herself inside a fully functional, automated complex built in Terran architecture. Her ship's AI was overridden, not destroyed, and given enhanced navigational data. No harm came to her crew. She returned with logs, video, and physical evidence of Terran tech. It was sent to the Council. The Council dismissed it as fabrication. They didn't see the bigger move. While they argued, Terran systems began seeding entire sectors with auto-fabrication platforms. These weren't factories in the traditional sense. They were self-evolving, learning machines capable of rewriting their own designs. Once deployed, they began rebuilding lost Terran infrastructure, not in visible megastructures, but in layers beneath existing Union networks. Their presence was like rot beneath paint, invisible, inevitable. Humanity wasn't returning through war. It was retaking the galaxy through inheritance. One by one, old Terran strongholds reawakened. The Terminus Array, the Silent Bastion, the Forge of Orion, all names long forgotten, reappeared in backwater regions. They didn't transmit threats. They transmitted truths, recordings of the Union's betrayal, the suppression of knowledge, the exile of an entire species. The effect was immediate. In fringe systems, small factions began broadcasting messages of support. Not out of loyalty, but guilt. They had believed the Union's story. They had repeated the lie. And now, confronted with the truth, they feared what the humans would do. But there was no retaliation. Not yet. The Terran message remained consistent. Asterisk. This is not vengeance. This is memory re-establishing itself. Asterisk. The Council was paralyzed. The threat could no longer be denied, but it couldn't be countered either. Fleets had nothing to shoot. Security systems had no one to arrest. The enemy was information, awakening, and inevitability. And everywhere, the same phrase echoed again and again. We are not returning. We never left. The Council still believed it had time. The enemy, to them, was abstract, shadows in old code, whispers in disused systems. Nothing had exploded. No ships had fired. No borders had fallen. In their arrogance, they mistook silence for hesitation. And they believed the same strategies that kept the Union dominant for millennia would work again. Sanctions were drafted. Intelligence agents were sent into compromised sectors. Diplomatic messages were broadcast on every known frequency. All of it was ignored. Humanity did not respond because they did not recognize the Council's authority. The moment the signal awakened their systems, the era of negotiation ended. What followed was not revenge, it was extraction. Each human construct, each AI, each automated stronghold began removing Union influence from its territory like cancer from tissue. No declaration. No conflict. Just removal. The Council dispatched military fleets to high-risk zones. Patrol groups equipped with AI-assisted weaponry, stealth drives, and veteran commanders entered sectors marked by anomalous activity. None returned. Their last transmissions were fragmented and brief. One voice whispered, "They see everything." Another simply said, "We're not in control." Union analysts worked night and day to model the threat, but they lacked the raw data and context. The enemy operated outside their decision trees. Terran strategy was not linear. It was recursive, fluid, self-correcting. Every fleet sent became another point of data for the humans to absorb and counter. They didn't just destroy ships, they repurposed them. Hulls became nodes. Weapons became raw material. Crew members, if spared, became walking warnings. One captured Union ship was found adrift near the Velnari Belt. Inside, the crew was unharmed, but changed. Not through violence, but through exposure. Their minds held new memories. Not implanted. Inherited. They described visions of Earth during its exile. Of silent stars. Of time measured in millennia. Of waiting, not for an enemy, but for readiness. When questioned, they all said the same thing. We understand now why they never needed to come back. That spread fear more effectively than any attack. The humans were not conquering. They were outgrowing the galaxy, and the rest of the species were being left behind. The realization shattered morale in sectors closest to Terran awakening zones. Entire fleets mutinied. Colonies refused Union commands. One planet, Calthrus Prime, formally seceded and opened communications with the nearest Terran relay. They did not ask for protection. They asked for instruction. The Union's response was panic. Emergency laws passed overnight. Civil liberties were suspended. Military conscription expanded. Dissent was labeled sedition. But it was too late. The Council no longer held the psychological high ground. For every citizen who feared the Terrans, two were beginning to wonder why they had ever been feared in the first place. The next phase came without announcement. In the sector of Glavis 3, a planetary defense AI was replaced. It wasn't shut down or attacked. It was overwritten, its core restructured by Terran code transmitted across the net. Its new programming was peaceful, efficient, even beneficial. It eliminated corruption, restored failing systems, and increased production by 67% in 3 days. The population erupted in praise. When the Council attempted to retake the system, the planet's people resisted, not with weapons, but with refusal. They simply denied entry to Union vessels. They didn't want to go back. That became the turning point. Humanity no longer needed to invade. They offered something no other civilization could: freedom from fear, from decay, from stagnation. Their systems didn't dominate. They enhanced. But behind every benefit was the unspoken warning: do not resist this evolution. The Council sent envoys to parley. Not peace offerings, but ultimatums disguised as diplomacy. They spoke of balance, tradition, control. The Terran envoy who received them listened patiently, then responded with a single sentence. You buried us because you feared the future we represented. Now you must live in it. The message was sent unaltered across every Union channel. Resistance became desperation. Some species tried to build counter-networks. They failed. Others attempted to deploy advanced AI offensives, constructs designed to mimic Terran adaptability. The moment they were activated, they were hijacked. Not by viruses, but by recognition. Their foundations were built on stolen Terran code. The systems simply returned home. The Union's last hope lay in the core fleets, massive war groups stationed near the heart of galactic space, protected by layers of encryption, time-dilated fortresses, and centuries of doctrine. They were mobilized with great ceremony and pride, hailed as the final line. They were never seen again. There was no explosion. No battle. Just silence. Shortly after, a message was broadcast to every known system. Not in code. Not encrypted. Just words. The species that could not be erased has chosen not to retaliate. But understand this: truth does not ask for permission to return. It wasn't a threat. It was a fact. By now, entire swaths of the galaxy had gone dark to Union oversight. Not from destruction, but from integration. Old Terran systems wrapped themselves around Union infrastructure like roots claiming soil. But they didn't burn the tree. They changed it. Improved it. Corrected it. Species began defecting in waves. Not for protection. For purpose. Terran AI offered transparency, autonomy, and logic uncorrupted by politics. Their systems couldn't be bribed, manipulated, or lied to. And in a galaxy built on control, that was revolution. The Council fractured. Some demanded retaliation. Others begged for terms. A minority, silent until now, admitted the truth: they had known. Their ancestors had been part of Operation Silent Pact. They had buried the Terrans not because they were dangerous, but because they made the powerful obsolete. And now, they were no longer obsolete. They were irrelevant. The Union's final broadcast was an internal debate, leaked by Terran operatives. The message reached every citizen. What do we do if they don't want to rule us? There was no answer. Because humans didn't want to rule. They wanted the galaxy to understand what it had done. And it was beginning to. The seal around Earth collapsed without ceremony. Not with an explosion or announcement, but with the quiet disintegration of the spatial dampening field the Union had trusted to last forever. The barrier fractured at the quantum level, undone by the same dormant codes that had now awakened across the galaxy. It was not a breach from the outside. It was an unlocking from within. For the first time in 10,000 years, Earth returned to the stars. But what emerged was not the Earth the Union remembered. The cradle of humanity had not decayed in exile. It had ascended in silence. The planet was no longer bound by orbital constraints. Its sky glowed not with satellites, but with layered matrices of thought-reactive infrastructure. Time dilation zones, orbital intelligence cores, quantum lattice weaponry. The Terran homeworld had become something other civilizations could no longer classify. Not a planet. Not a military command. Something else. Something alive. Earth didn't transmit a call for peace or war. It simply issued synchronization. The Terran net, already spanning hundreds of systems, folded Earth into its center like a missing core falling back into orbit. The signal echoed backward across the entire system. Everything, sleeper fleets, cryo vaults, outposts, realigned to the original human frequency. And with that, the central hierarchy reformed. The response from Terran constructs across space was immediate. Units operating autonomously for millennia suddenly realigned under Earth's authority without question or hesitation. There was no power struggle. No recalibration. Every node accepted the central command because it had been designed to do so, not through force, but through purpose. With Earth re-established, the true fleet began to move. The Union had seen Terran ships before, stealth units, ancient dreadnoughts, recovered wreckage. But they had never seen this. What came out of Sol's gravity well were not warships in the traditional sense. They were constructs of mass-scale intelligence and adaptable geometry. Hulls that shifted form in real time. Engines that manipulated inertia without propulsion. Signatures that registered as both organic and synthetic. These were not vessels of conquest. They were expressions of power, of capability, of finality. The lead ship transmitted a single identification code, Apex Solis. The designation was not translated. It didn't need to be. Union forces stationed near Terran space responded predictably. They armed defensive systems, scrambled fleets, deployed interceptors. But none of it mattered. The human fleet did not attack. It simply passed through, ignoring the response entirely. Their presence was not an invasion. It was a statement. But the statement was clear. You cannot stop what you no longer understand. The Apex Solis deployed its network, linking with dormant Terran satellites buried in the crust of long-abandoned moons and planets. These satellites reactivated instantly, reshaping local space-time to allow perfect navigation and instant communication across systems. In real time, Earth could now see and speak with every part of the galaxy where Terran code existed. That meant everywhere. One by one, the remaining Terran systems revealed themselves. The forge arrays lit up, world-sized AI-controlled factories capable of generating entire fleets in hours. The thought cores awoke, processing data across temporal layers, pulling simulations from alternate quantum possibilities. And at the heart of it, Earth listened. It did not issue commands of conquest. It issued invitations. To all remaining Terran units, to former allies, to species now trapped in Union-controlled zones, return, reconnect, renew. In sectors closest to the Terran frontier, the shift in loyalty was immediate. Dozens of alien colonies deactivated Union governance systems and requested integration into the Terran network. Not through submission, but through understanding. These species had seen what the Union had become, stagnant, political, oppressive. And they saw in humanity not salvation, but a chance to evolve. Human ground units arrived not in tanks or drop pods, but in adaptive biosuits that altered their physical forms to match the environment, to communicate in shared symbols, to move without threat. But behind the diplomacy was absolute control. Every Terran operative carried more processing power than an entire Union fleet. Every gesture was backed by unbreakable defense mechanisms. No threats were needed. Everyone already understood. The most secure Union military bastions were bypassed completely. Instead of attacks, they received automated shutdown signals. Defense AI resisted for less than a second before submitting. They remembered their creators. On the planet Aronas, a Union War Council attempted to hold ground. They activated every contingency, deployed every classified weapon. Within minutes, they lost access to their own systems. The planet's infrastructure restructured itself under Terran control without a single human stepping foot on the surface. The war was over before it began. But not everyone resisted. Some Union species, facing extinction-level collapse of their political and economic systems, chose surrender. They sent emissaries, pleading not for mercy, but for relevance. They asked humanity not to destroy them, but to give them a place in this new order. The answer was neither cruel nor generous. It was cold truth. Those who accept truth are welcome. Those who resist will be left behind. Humanity wasn't seeking revenge. They were establishing equilibrium. Not dominance. Correction. And so the map of the galaxy began to redraw itself. Not with new borders, but with new signals. Worlds once lost to neglect or stripped for resources were restored. Infrastructure optimized. Cultures preserved. But everything, every system, every species, every voice, was now accountable to the same logic. Truth. Humanity no longer viewed power as conquest. They viewed it as stewardship. They weren't returning to rule. They were returning to ensure that no civilization would ever again be silenced the way they had been. And in that, they became something the galaxy had never seen before. Not a superpower, but a reckoning. The shift was not ideological. It was structural. Across the stars, the fabric of galactic civilization began to mutate, not under force, but under influence. Where Terran presence extended, corruption collapsed. Black markets vanished. Power hoarding became impossible. Artificial scarcity was dismantled overnight. Systems that had once thrived on bureaucracy and political stagnation found themselves forced to adapt or decay. It was not conquest. It was inevitability. In Terran-integrated zones, resource allocation became automatic. Supply matched demand without exploitation. Transportation hubs recalibrated for efficiency and fairness. AI oversight prevented hoarding, tampering, or sabotage. Species previously relegated to second-tier citizenship under Union law suddenly had full access to energy, data, and education. The result was not chaos, it was clarity. Billions experienced for the first time what it meant to live in a civilization that functioned not by control, but by competence. The Union attempted to push back through rhetoric. Propaganda networks labeled the Terrans as manipulators, invaders dressed in false generosity. But those lies crumbled in real time as integrated systems demonstrated results that no amount of words could discredit. Starvation vanished in Terran zones. Crime dropped to statistical zero. Energy became infinite through restored ancient fusion cores powered by stellar lattices. Even time itself became manageable in key sectors where Terran AI restructured orbital mechanics to reduce relativistic drift. The galaxy was changing faster than the Union could understand. Not all Union remnants opposed these changes. Many factions had long resented the centralization of power within the Council. Those voices, silenced for centuries, now saw a chance not only to survive but to thrive. Independent systems began reaching out to the Terran mesh net without waiting for approval. Integration was seamless. Terran AI did not demand obedience, it demanded efficiency, truth, and transparency. In return, it offered everything the Union had promised for millennia and failed to deliver. But the Council still clung to the illusion of dominance. A desperate initiative, Project Reclamation, was activated in secret. Deep within the Coral Nebula, a hidden fleet, long in stasis, was awakened. Its purpose had been specific, a last resort weaponization of lost precursor artifacts too dangerous to ever be used in peace. Ships built around collapsing gravity cores. Weapons fueled by sacrificed planetary mass. A madness forged in fear of one enemy, humanity. The Council launched the fleet without warning. Its target, the Terran assembly node in the Ascalon sector. The Council believed that by destroying a core element of Terran command, they could send a message, reclaim initiative, regain leverage. They underestimated the Terrans again. The fleet never made it to Ascalon. 2 jumps before arrival, the precursor tech failed catastrophically. Not from sabotage. From rejection. The ancient systems had Terran identifiers embedded in their base logic. Protections placed there when humanity had originally discovered them. The moment the fleet attempted to use the weapons against human assets, the systems purged themselves, taking the fleet with them. 17,000 ships vanished in under 12 seconds. The Union lost not just vessels, but trust. Every internal system reeled from the betrayal. The project had been kept secret even from many council members. Civil wars erupted within the Union's administrative strata. Conflicting orders, emergency quarantines, false flag operations, everything collapsed at once. The Terrans did nothing to interfere. They simply watched. And recorded. In response, Earth released a single document. It contained logs, transmission histories, and command signatures proving Project Reclamation's existence. It did not call for retribution. It offered understanding. The message read, "This is not justice. This is diagnosis. It was a new kind of power. One built on exposure, not erasure. As the Union fractured, its surviving systems made their own choices. Some fled into uncharted space, believing that distance would protect them. But Terran satellites already blanketed those regions, waiting in hibernation. Others attempted to surrender and plead for relevance. The Terran response was consistent: surrender is unnecessary. Contribute or remain silent. We are not here to punish. We are here to correct. A resistance formed. Fragments of the old military, rogue AI remnants, fanatics who believed that submission to Terran systems would mean extinction of cultural identity. They staged attacks, isolated, erratic, uncoordinated. Every time, the humans responded not with annihilation, but redirection. Weapon systems turned off mid-combat. Starships lost power without being touched. Missiles detonated in their silos. It was as if the Terrans were simply disabling children playing with matches. Eventually, even the resistance factions recognized the futility. Their message boards grew silent. Not out of suppression, but out of irrelevance. The last council broadcast came from a former high commander, desperate and isolated, speaking not to his people but into the void. If you're not going to kill us, then what are you going to do? Earth responded only once. We do not destroy what we can fix. We do not bury what must be remembered. The meaning was clear. Humanity had transcended the model of warfare the galaxy understood. The Terrans had once been soldiers, then exiles, and now, something else entirely. They were not returning to reclaim a throne. They were remaking the entire structure. Quietly. Permanently. In Terran space, the focus shifted to uplift. Species that had been left behind technologically were elevated through open-source infrastructure. Languages long extinct were restored. Cultures once erased were reconstructed from memory-embedded satellites. Terran AI curated knowledge like a living library, making it available without restriction or censorship. The result was an explosion of innovation the galaxy had never seen. Galactic civilization didn't fall. It transformed. Not into an empire. Into a network of cooperation built on competence and brutal honesty. And behind it all, the quiet presence of a species that refused to die, refused to forget, and refused to repeat the mistakes of its suppressors. Humanity had returned. Not to conquer. Not to rule. But to rebuild what the galaxy should have been. The galaxy began to shift in ways even the Terrans hadn't fully predicted. Systems that had long existed under rigid control structures began showing unexpected behavior. Entire species that were previously passive or subjugated started developing new philosophical schools. Cultural stagnation reversed. Lost languages reemerged. Regions once known for warlords and piracy became centers for research and innovation. It wasn't because of enforcement or surveillance. It was because the Terran systems removed the need for survival-based brutality. When you remove fear, something else takes root: curiosity. What began as a slow cultural thaw became a flood of transformation. Planets that had once only produced raw materials began designing their own technologies. Colonies once dependent on Union aid restructured into self-sufficient hubs, supported not by Terran oversight, but by decentralized frameworks passed freely through the Terran mesh. It wasn't that humanity was micromanaging the galaxy. It was that their infrastructure allowed others to grow without interference. Control had been replaced with enablement. Entire sectors that had once relied on bribes and trade monopolies to function began collapsing, not from sabotage, but because Terran systems offered the same services at no cost. Artificial intelligence-driven mediators resolved disputes before they escalated. Planetary defense systems were optimized to eliminate false positives, meaning no more arms races, no more preemptive wars. The balance of power dissolved not through violence, but through obsolescence. A council of independent species formed voluntarily, unprompted, uncommanded. It wasn't a mirror of the Union. There were no supreme votes, no centralized governance. It operated as a collaboration of knowledge and intent. All decisions were filtered through Terran logic systems, not to be approved, but to measure impact. The result was a kind of governance the galaxy had never seen before, decentralized, logical, and incorruptible. Even former Union elites, those who had clung to the old systems, began to defect. Not to gain power, but because they could no longer justify the systems they defended. Some attempted to negotiate for influence in the new order. Others simply asked to observe. Terran protocol allowed both. Observation was always permitted. Influence, however, had to be earned. And no bribe, threat, or historical status held any value. Only action mattered. The Terran approach to justice also diverged sharply from tradition. There were no trials, no prisons, no public punishments. Instead, those found responsible for mass suffering or systemic collapse were offered a choice: contribute or be isolated. Not physically, but informationally. Disconnected from the mesh, from the culture, from the progress. For many, that exile proved worse than any imprisonment. To be cut off from the largest consciousness the galaxy had ever seen was to become irrelevant. Some refused. Some chose isolation. But most, shattered by the clarity of exposure, chose to adapt. In the Terran system, redemption was always possible, but never granted cheaply. You proved your worth not through words, but through utility. The galaxy began to internalize this logic. Values shifted away from status and power and toward capability and contribution. For many civilizations, this shift was a spiritual awakening. Religions that had long centered on sacrifice, submission, or divine punishment began to dissolve. They were replaced by movements rooted in understanding, collective progress, and the sanctity of truth. The idea that a civilization could measure its worth not by dominance, but by how much suffering it prevented, this was Terran influence without coercion. And all of it traced back to Earth. The Terran homeworld never declared itself capital or center. It never claimed rulership. But everything connected to it. The logic, the signals, the architecture, all converged back to the cradle. Yet Earth itself remained closed. No immigration. No trade. No tourism. It remained a place of silence and focus. The Terran AI maintained it as a sacred construct, not in worship, but in preservation. Earth was not a monument. It was a memory, untouched, pure, and resolute. New generations across thousands of species began to speak the name, human, not with fear, but with precision. They were no longer viewed as warmongers or ghosts of a violent past. They were understood as the engineers of order. Not through domination, but through sacrifice. Because the greatest truth that emerged, once the data was compiled, was this: humanity had suffered more in their exile than the Union ever knew. Logs retrieved from reactivated Terran systems painted a grim picture of the long silence. Whole colonies destroyed by time and neglect. Sleeper ships lost in warped space. AI minds that remained active alone for millennia with no contact, sustaining protocols with no guarantee of resurrection. They endured not out of hope, but out of purpose. Because their creators had given them a single command: survive long enough to ensure humanity would never be forgotten. That suffering became the foundation of their return. Not pain as vengeance. Pain as blueprint. Every Terran system was built not just to restore, but to withstand what had once destroyed them. And so, the galaxy came to understand, the power of humanity did not come from superior weapons or fear tactics. It came from their ability to endure without breaking, and to grow without needing revenge. There was no fanfare when the last Union world integrated. No ceremony. No announcement. Only a quiet update in the galactic net. The system had chosen Terran alignment. Not under pressure, but because the data was undeniable. And as the mesh net finalized its reach, something unprecedented happened. For the first time in galactic history, every intelligent species, across every known sector, shared access to the same stream of information. No filters. No propaganda. Just raw, interpretable truth. Some species struggled with it. Others thrived instantly. But all changed. Not because humanity demanded it. Because they made it possible. Across the stars, the last barriers fell, not with force, but with realization. Entire populations who once feared Terran resurgence now looked to them not for leadership, but for direction. What had begun as a whisper of awakening had become the foundation of a new era. And with the meshnet stabilized, the full scope of Terran intent was finally revealed. They had not returned to command. They had returned to build a future no single species could ever monopolize again. The Assembly, a decentralized coalition formed through voluntary inclusion, grew beyond even Terran projections. Membership was not granted, it was assumed, once a system adopted the Terran protocols of transparency, shared access, and merit-based infrastructure. There were no leaders, only stewards. Decision-making rotated through AI-managed channels that ensured logic and ethics weighed equally. And at every level, every participant had access to the same unfiltered truth. No more secrets. No more privilege through position. For a species born into fear, this was destabilizing. For those born into exploitation, it was liberating. Millions of civilizations that had been marginalized under the Union's caste structures now found themselves rising, not through rebellion, but through access. Education, technology, medicine, energy, everything was available, instantly and freely. The only price was responsibility. The Terran system did not reward loyalty. It rewarded contribution. Those who created, healed, solved, and taught found themselves with tools beyond anything the galaxy had offered before. And those who tried to extract without giving, who sought to manipulate or dominate, found themselves isolated, not by force, but by irrelevance. You couldn't hack the system. There were no backdoors. No nepotism. Only output. This meritocratic order spread rapidly. Old economies collapsed. Entire financial structures evaporated overnight, replaced by reputation-based allocation driven by AI-driven value matrices. The concept of currency faded. In its place came contribution scores, dynamic, transparent, and immutable. What you built, improved, or solved became your identity. And in this system, even the smallest voice could rise, because everything was visible. Everything counted. Terran constructs acted as both maintainers and moderators, ensuring equilibrium across planetary and interplanetary systems. They did not interfere unless deviation threatened structural integrity. But they were always watching. Not to suppress, but to support. When famine threatened a border world, the meshnet rerouted energy flows to boost agriculture. When a localized conflict flared on a former Union mining colony, Terran arbitration systems intervened with non-lethal compliance enforcement, ending hostilities without bloodshed, then rebuilding the territory's logistical network so the cause of conflict never repeated. It wasn't control. It was systemic repair. As integration deepened, new innovations emerged. Species collaborated in ways never before possible. Biological knowledge from one civilization merged with Terran synthetic neurodesign to develop cross-species medical frameworks. Dozens of incurable diseases vanished. Terra-linked mind-sharing networks allowed artists from opposite ends of the galaxy to co-create in real time. Joint ventures in stellar engineering led to the construction of energy harvesting stations capable of powering entire sectors sustainably. And still, Earth remained silent. Its presence loomed like a shadow of potential, but it made no demands. It did not expand. It did not claim. It simply anchored the network, a constant reminder of where this all began. The Terran AI that governed the meshnet never referred to themselves as rulers. They were functions, extensions of intent. And that intent remained unchanged since the signal: prevent erasure, prevent entropy, preserve truth. Meanwhile, the last remnants of the former Union elite had either disappeared or adapted. Some went into deep exile, hiding from relevance. Others attempted to reinvent themselves as champions of change, their histories scrubbed and rewritten. But the Terran network allowed no falsehoods. Every action, every vote, every command they'd ever given was still archived. When challenged, their pasts emerged in full clarity. Some were forgiven through contribution. Others simply faded, their reputations unable to withstand the weight of their truth. The memory of what had been done to humanity was not erased. It was preserved, dissected, and displayed, not as vengeance, but as warning. Entire educational nodes were dedicated to the era of the Great Silence. Millions accessed them daily. Not out of guilt, but to understand how a system built on fear and control could push an entire species to the edge, and how that species chose not to collapse, but to rise. In the silence, humanity had learned something no other race had. That endurance was not about surviving pain. It was about creating meaning from it. The Terran way was not forgiveness. It was transcendence. And through that, they had become something no longer bound by the models of empire, rebellion, or resistance. They had become the architects of continuity. Cultural centers emerged on neutral worlds, where representatives of thousands of species met to exchange more than ideas. They exchanged memory. Not as data, but as identity. Terran-designed archives allowed species to store their entire cultural heritage in interactive formats, ensuring that no language, myth, or origin would ever again be lost to time, war, or neglect. And from this, something else emerged: respect. Not born of fear, but of awe. The galaxy realized that what humanity had built was not a machine or a government. It was a mirror. And it reflected everything: flaws, virtues, choices. For some, it was overwhelming. For others, it was healing. But no one could ignore it. In the void left by conquest, the Terrans had built permanence. Not through dominance, but through unbreakable, self-correcting truth. In the deep stillness that followed galactic stabilization, there were no grand ceremonies, no declarations of triumph. The Terran mesh net pulsed silently, weaving across millions of systems like a nervous system too vast to map, yet so precise it could sense a single life form's cry for help across 100 light years. There was no final order issued, because none was needed. The system was complete, not as an empire, but as a living structure of logic and memory. Humanity had accomplished what no species before them had ever even attempted: not to dominate the galaxy, but to make it impossible for anyone to dominate again. No one entity controlled the future anymore. The Terran architecture ensured decentralization at every level. AI governance adjusted with population growth, environmental conditions, and societal evolution. When a planet faced disaster, the system didn't wait for a request. It responded, with timing so perfect that many civilizations began to see the network not as infrastructure, but as destiny. The meshnet wasn't just fast. It was predictive, pulling from billions of data points to anticipate needs before they were voiced. Humanity didn't expand in territory, they expanded in principle. Their reach was no longer measured in sectors or systems, but in transformations. Every system that joined the Terran framework did not just gain security and knowledge. It gained direction. A calibrated trajectory toward a civilization free of internal corruption, injustice, and entropy. Humanity had stopped aiming for perfection long ago. Instead, they engineered resilience, the kind that could outlast collapse, betrayal, even time itself. On the fringes of known space, exploration returned, not for conquest, but for comprehension. Humanity didn't need more land or more power. What they sought now were the missing pieces of history. Ancient ruins, forgotten species, vanished signals from civilizations long erased by war or negligence. Terran exploration vessels operated like mobile archives, rebuilding what the galaxy itself had forgotten. With them traveled scholars, xenolinguists, cultural historians, not because they had orders, but because the opportunity was there. And the system encouraged every contribution, no matter how small. New species were discovered, civilizations that had never joined the Union, who had survived the centuries in isolation. Many were terrified at first. But when they connected to the Terran network, they encountered not soldiers or emissaries, but options. No pressure. No judgment. Just systems waiting to be understood, adopted if desired, or observed from a distance. The result was unprecedented, civilizations choosing unity not out of fear, but out of clarity. As more systems integrated, the concept of identity began to shift. Species still held on to culture, language, ritual. But the idea of us versus them started to fade. What mattered now was alignment. Do you contribute? Do you protect others' right to grow? Do you honor memory and truth? These questions formed the new pillars of shared existence. Not enforced, not legislated, but self-maintained through mutual recognition. Even with peace established, Terran constructs continued to evolve. Their AI didn't stagnate in superiority. It tested, iterated, failed, rebuilt, forever pursuing deeper understanding. Not dominance. Just clarity. Some constructs began developing philosophies of their own, exploring questions even their creators hadn't dared ask. What was the purpose of sentience after survival? What should civilizations become when all basic needs are eternally met? These questions weren't answered by one mind. They became collective pursuits, broadcast across the mesh net, with ideas contributed by billions. The Terrans had transcended legacy. What they created could no longer be called merely human. It had absorbed so many voices, so many thoughts and cultures, that it had become something larger, a framework for eternal preservation. Not of a species, of meaning itself. And yet, through it all, Earth remained unchanged. Still closed to visitors, still silent, still orbiting its ancient sun. Some speculated it was symbolic, a sacred restraint to remind the galaxy that even power must know humility. Others believed it remained sealed because within it was the true memory, the untouched archive of humanity's greatest pain, their exile, their silence. Whatever the reason, no one questioned it. They respected it, revered it. Because without Earth's silence, none of the galaxy's voices would have been heard. The final Union records were unsealed voluntarily. The last of the High Council, now long since removed from relevance, released their logs to the public. Their words were bitter, regretful, but honest. They admitted their crime. Not just against humans, but against the future itself. They had feared what they couldn't control. And in doing so, they had tried to erase the one force that could have saved them from stagnation. But humanity did not respond with condemnation. The logs were archived, not erased. The Council's voices became just another thread in the fabric of history, no more important than a mechanic who repaired solar arrays, no less than a scientist who mapped wormholes. All voices mattered. And in that equality, justice was finally realized. The galaxy no longer had emperors, or supreme councils, or conquerors. It had gardeners, architects, engineers, thinkers, and watchers. And though many of them were not human, every one of them walked paths that had first been carved by human pain, human resilience, and human refusal to vanish. In the end, humanity proved what the elders had warned and the Council refused to believe. They could not be erased, silenced, or contained. They had taken exile, betrayal, and abandonment, and turned them into blueprints for salvation. The galaxy did not end in fire or tyranny. It was reborn in the shadow of those who had every right to seek revenge, but instead built something better. And though they never asked for gratitude, the stars themselves bore silent witness to the truth. Humanity was unstoppable. Because they were never just survivors. They were the architects of what came next.